Hello, I'm Stephen McInerney, Academic Director and Deputy CEO at the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilisation. Today we're looking at Shakespeare's Hamlet, arguably his greatest play, certainly one of his greatest tragedies. It's usually grouped with Macbeth, Othello and King Lear as among the four greatest of Shakespeare's tragedies. Lord Alfred Tennyson regarded Hamlet as the greatest creation in all of literature. To explore this play, I'm joined by Dr. Laurel Moffat, scholar, writer and researcher who lives and works in Sydney, and Dr. Kishore Saval, senior lecturer in the Western Civilisation program at Australian Catholic University, formerly of Brown University, and before that a graduate student at Harvard. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I want to get straight into the first act and talk about the ghost. The play opens with this line, "Who's there?" almost like the answer to a knock-knock joke. And then before long we have someone making, not an unexpected statement, "Long live the king." Long live the king. Which is a very interesting statement when you think that very soon thereafter we're going to meet a dead king who is still in a sense alive in the form of the ghost of King Hamlet, Prince Hamlet's father. And of course, "Long live the king" is referring most immediately to Claudius, King Hamlet's brother, who has of course usurped his throne. When the play opens, there's some confusion about whether this ghost is real or not. Horatio has expressed doubts and says this is all a fantasy, to these in the imaginations of those who are on watch, on the castle walls in Denmark. And then, of course, Horatio sees the ghost, and then soon thereafter, Hamlet says of his father, "He was a man taken for all in all. I shall not see his like again," or "we shall not see his like again." And Horatio says, "Well, actually, I just saw him yesterday." Exactly, which is a rather comedic, rather comical moment there, just in the timing of that. We shall not see his like again, and then, well, actually, I just saw him. So what is going on with this ghost? Is he real? Is he, is it in the imaginations of these people? Because later in the play, when Hamlet's with his mother doesn't see the ghost, but Hamlet does.
Yeah, and we see him.
And we see him on stage, at least in some productions, right?
Oh, right, yeah. I guess depending how.
Yeah, there's an Olivier production, I think, where the ghost is there as a shadow, which again doesn't answer the question about whether it's real or not.
But do we hear him?
Yes, we hear him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, yes, another sense.
But I think in a way this question, who's there?
Well, that's what I wanted to start with, actually, because that's really unsettling for an audience.
Yeah.
Because that's the question an audience will have when you go to a play, you're wondering who's there, and then when the person on stage says, "Hey, who's there?" You're like, wait a second, you're supposed to know.
It's out there to the audience. You mean?
Yeah. Or no, not as if the question is to the audience, although it could be. Yes. The question could be, but also the fact that even the characters don't know, supposedly, who's on stage, it's unsettling. Yeah. Which I think is the point. Yeah. Is that it's an unsettled time, and it's midnight. It's the time between. Right. It's liminal. It's the time between night and day, one day and the next. Fittingly, this play comes right in the middle of Shakespeare's career. We're ending the Elizabethan age. We're about to begin the Jacobean. We're in between time. That's right.
And it's who's there, and what's described is more unsettling because you don't know what's being talked about. Has this thing appeared again tonight? And just when they're describing it, that's when the ghost enters. It's when yon same star that's westward from the pole had made his course to illume that part of heaven where now it burns. Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating one, enter ghost. So you're trying to follow what's happening, and as you're trying to follow what's happening, it happens. And so it's this very strange thing that you're not able actually to follow through on the questions that you're asking yourself.
Yes, he's playing with time even at the very beginning, in a way, because it's layered. We're in this moment here, waiting for a ghost to appear. He's going back. Bernard is telling a story about the night before, so we're like, where are we? Are we tonight? Are we yesterday? Then the ghost enters, and we're like, oh, we're right here.
Yes, yes, that's right. Yeah.
And then, once we do meet the ghost, there's some debate about, is he a spirit of health or a goblin damned? Is he, and of course, where's he from? He mentions that he uses the language of purgatory, that he's condemned to fast in fires, as it were, until his sins are purged away, suggests that he's in this state of purgatory. But then, if you think about what that would mean, normally in the Middle Ages, these ghosts that are appearing to people from purgatory asking for prayers, prayers for their soul so that they can be relieved of the suffering of purgatory, and then they're released from this toll house. He talks about a prison house. They're released from this prison house into heaven. But, ghosts from purgatory don't normally say, revenge my most foul and unnatural murder.
And that's what I think is interesting about this ghost. And Horatio kind of sets it up a bit by saying that the presence of this ghost bodes some strange eruption to our state. So it's not just about the past, it's also about the future, or the present and the future. But also, something I noticed in this rereading is Horatio's line, "It harrows me with fear and wonder about this ghost," which is also, he uses almost the same line at the end toward Fortinbras. So we've got these bookends of Horatio speaking about fear and wonder, woe and wonder, which I find really interesting. So there's something about the ghost that's about fear and wonder. There's also the scene at the end, which is horrific, which kind of mirrors the presence of this ghost as well, and a choice, I suppose. What will Hamlet do?
Yeah, and I think the doubts about the provenance of this ghost and its intentions flow through the play. There's firstly that they're telling Hamlet, these men don't go after it. It might cause you to do something stupid. And it may actually be trying to lure you, throw you off a cliff, or cause you to throw yourself off a cliff, or to get you to do something which will lead to your damnation. In other words, it might be a sort of spirit of hell, this ghost. So Hamlet says, "Oh, my prophetic soul," that after meeting the ghost and hearing the ghost's story, the ghost gives him confirmation of what he's already thought. But later on, he seems to rely not on what he initially thought, but on the evidence the ghost provides, and then thinks that this evidence might be unreliable. He says, "I'll have grounds more relative than this. It's not just enough the ghost has said it. I need to prove for myself." Hence, the play within the play that he sets up to catch the conscience of the king. So on the one hand, the ghost seems to confirm what he believes. On the other hand, the ghost's witness doesn't serve as sufficient confirmation to allow Hamlet to act decisively on what the ghost has asked him to do. So it's not an original idea. Of course, it's Stephen Greenblatt's explored it most famously about the significance of the ghost for the doubts that Hamlet has and his inability to act. But it seems extraordinary that this figure, this ghost, just dominates the play, even though he has very few lines. He comes in and out, not so much at the end. We don't hear from him after a while. So in addition, in this opening act, we see other reasons for Hamlet's doubt. Doubts about not only his course of action, but about other people and his mother, Gertrude. is someone who he no longer trusts. Why? Why does he no longer trust Gertrude? Why does he start to lose faith in not only his experience but in other people? Everyone, it seems, except Horatio.
Well, I think one of the issues about trust and trust of others in Hamlet that he mentions and other characters do too is the difference between seeming and being. And
yeah, he says, "I know not seems."
Right,
Yeah.
and he's professing to just be in his grief, and to be true to that and honest, but it's mirrored throughout in all the different relationships in Hamlet about this tension between seeming to be something, but actually being the thing, and then also the encouragement to seem, you know, pretend to do something so that you can achieve an outcome from another person. So I think that would naturally set up a person to be a little bit cagey, a little bit questioning of people's motives. There's also...
Well, he says to Gertrude, assume a virtue if you have it not. Almost, you know, pretend to have it, even if you
Pretense.
don't. And then you might get it somehow by pretending to have it.
And that's what I'm wondering about, because you make the assertion, or you raise the question of whether Hamlet can act. Is he just filled with indecision, or whether he can act? And there's this option that he's acting, as in assuming a character.
Right.
But in that becoming a character almost, he is acting. He's doing something, which also asks the question about what's the play doing as well.
Right, it does. Yes, he does. But I guess the question is, what form is that acting taking? So yes, he's acting often, you know, he's assuming a character. We see that with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his interactions with them. He's often, you know, he might pick up a book to seem to be reading, you know, when Polonius comes on. But he doesn't act, you know, on the command of the ghost. You know, he doesn't immediately, he actually says, you know, when he first meets the ghost, well, I'm going to get on with this right now, you know. So that with wings as swift as meditation or the thoughts of love, I may sweep to my revenge. Even that is strange, because meditation is not something that is swift, and thoughts of love themselves are not normally swift or quick. These are slow, deliberative reflections. But so again, I think there is this tension between this desire to act quickly and this seeming inability to act, by which I mean acting on, you know, the command to kill Claudius.
But yet if he did, there'd hardly be a play. So is Shakespeare playing with us a little bit in that he does act, it just happens to take the length of Shakespeare's longest play, which is Hamlet.
Yes, and there's a reason it's such a long play, as opposed to, say, Macbeth, where you get the action straight off, don't you? You get the, should I kill the king? Yes, I'm going to kill the king.
Right.
But it raises that question of whether whether he should do this in the first place.
Oh, that's true.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I think that, I mean, one of the things that we find, we might say, is different about Hamlet seems to be in a position similar to that of, say, Orestes in Aeschylus. But we might say that, nevertheless, most people watching Hamlet feel that Hamlet has a depth of vocation, a feeling of destiny that is different from that of Orestes. And the usual description is something that, whereas anyone in the position of Orestes would have done what Orestes did, only Hamlet in his position will do what Hamlet has done, or only Othello in Othello's position will do what Othello has done. That classical tragedy is a mimesis of a praxis, but this is a mimesis of character, personality, whatever we want.
So classical, it's a tragedy of fate, typically. This is a tragedy of character.
Right, but exactly, and this raises the question of what is a character? What does it? We often say that Shakespeare creates great personalities, but what is a personality? I think that the typical account of Shakespeare in the post-Enlightenment world is something like Hegel's when he says that Shakespeare's characters are free artists of themselves. This implies that they are defined by their autonomy, their subjectivity. But I think that this is a mistake. I think that in Shakespeare, the subjectivity of characters is at odds with their personality. I think that the word personality can mean many different things in the Western culture, in the spiritual, metaphysical, and cultural premises that form the background to Hamlet. I mean, there's a persona can be a mask, but we also say that God is a substance in three persons. Now, what does that mean? I think a theologian, David Bentley Hart, said, when we say that God is a person, we don't mean that God is a psychological subjectivity. Instead, our subjectivity is often the thing that stands in the spiritual sense, inhibits the expression of our personality. And I think that that is actually something that is happening here, that just as in Richard III or other characters, their autonomy brings about their personal disintegration. Hamlet's subjectivity goes hand in hand with a kind of personal disintegration.
Right, so do you think he's asking, it's not so much whether or not he acts, but he's asking the question, what kind of person I'm going to be?
I think, yes, and I think the idea is that Hamlet has, we might say that we feel that Hamlet has a vocation, but I think Hamlet's vocation is something other than to avenge his father. And that is actually the problem. And the problem here is that I think that this is a play in which Hamlet doesn't know what his vocation is. I think that this very much relates to the fact that there are references to Wittenberg and to purgatory and so on and so
So if
forth.
you'd just gone back to Wittenberg.
Yeah, exactly.
Just go back to school.
Right.
Just get busy reading.
Right, if he had just, borrowed the notes.
Right, so he doesn't know what he should be, right?
Yes.
Which is, I mean, in the time, it's a religious question. Some again, it might have been Greenblatt says that one way of reading this play is you've got this Catholic ghost talking to his Protestant son. You've got pre-Reformation England. It's obviously in Denmark, but it's about England as much as it's Denmark. It's about every person, not just this specific time and place. But you've got pre-Reformation Europe engaging with, Reformation Europe, and all those questions are live issues among the audience. I mean, their parents, in many cases, were raised in the old faith. Whether they desire to or not, they have to embrace this new faith. Doctrines like purgatory are thrown out. Belief in ghosts is actually, I think, condemned. So all of these things are at play. So, when you say, how should he act? It's also, what should he be? And that relates to how should he act? And it is ultimately, it seems to me, there is, throughout the play, there's references to the fate of the soul.
That's right.
Where am I going? Where is Ophelia going? Is she to be, buried in Christian burial? If she willfully, took her own life? Laertes reconciles with Hamlet at the end, saying, well, let's reconcile, forgive each other and then we can go to heaven. Claudius is caught praying, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Thoughts without words never to heaven go. He's desperately trying to work out his salvation, but he can't because he still loves the things he's got from having committed a terrible sin. It seems to me that it is a play about the meaning of life, about what it means to be saved, and all of these fundamental questions.
I think that's right, and I think that Luther, in many ways, does go back to and draw upon something very important in St. Paul, which is that when Paul says, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, for what I want to do, I do not do, and what I hate, I do.
Yeah.
And so I think perhaps the greatest expression of vocation in the history of Christianity can be found in Paul, and yet Paul acknowledges that he is incomprehensible to himself.
Yeah.
And that's really taken up by Luther in the idea that there is no technique of salvation in the form of works, that salvation is something wholly extrinsic to yourself. And what this creates is a sense that you cannot bring about your own personal coherence in the form of works. And therefore, there is nothing that you can do to bring this coherence to your own personality. But this is still also reflected in a Catholic sense in the prohibition against gnosis, against the idea that our personality is somehow surrounded by a cloud of unknowing. It leads to the Baroque Catholicism of John of the Cross. And so in both sides, there's something about this unknowability of personality. Hamlet emphasizes this mystery of personality, and therefore the unknowability of what our mission, our vocation actually is.
It's there right at the start, where Horatio enters and a part of him, part of him enters. This notion that he's sort of somehow fragmented, broken up, he's not whole.
Right, is it a theatrical part, exactly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I'll find the reference when he walks on. Say what? Is Horatio there? Horatio says, a piece of him.
A piece of him, right.
A piece of him.
A piece of him.
I mean, it's a strange line. What does he mean? Are you there or not? Are you here or not?
Is it about a role? Is he just fulfilling a role? I mean,
Right.
because then we find out, he also has been in Wittenberg, like as in...
Exactly.
Yeah, is he a
so we should
guard? Is he a
explain
student?
Wittenberg
Is he-
is famously, it's a deliberate anachronism that Shakespeare's using, because this is meant to be set many years before any of these conflicts have arisen in Europe. But of course, Wittenberg, he has Horatio and Hamlet studying there. It was the place, the university town of Martin Luther.
But regardless of Luther, just the idea of a university town and Hamlet's having to choose between the life of a scholar, life of study, or the life of politics, and the idea of the body politic. And regardless of whether or not he's capable of determining who he's going to be, I guess, he continually struggles with what he will do. And for centuries, the audience and the critics have said, when are you going to do it? Yeah. So there's that. I think Shakespeare's very clever also at showing us as a reader or as an audience member that we're so desperate to do things. But actually, isn't most of it about being? Isn't most of it about, like, who are you?
It's funny that the question is to be or not to be. It's not to act or not to act, right?
Or to do or not to do.
To do or not to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And when you look at the speech, all of the things that are aligned with being appear to be passive, to suffer, to bear, to be patient. And the things that align with not being align with, to take arms, to make, and to do. And of course, we tend to think of this as a soliloquy about a person who's deciding whether or not to kill himself. But this is in a play in which he's deciding whether or not to kill someone else. And when something so metaphysically loaded as being or to be is evoked, we have to think about some of the philosophical background behind it. And one of those things is the fact that is the principle that God brought the world, the creation, from nothingness into being. So the free will has a choice, the choice of to be or the choice of not to be. That is to say, evil is a privation of being. And in that way, the choice to kill the king is to make the choice of the privation of being. And Hamlet grasps this in the sense that he knows that to act in this sense is actually to take the path of evil.
In a Christian dispensation, right?
That's right.
But we also see it in the last scene. Like, we see the effect of his action is total destruction.
Yeah.
For the most part, right? Except for Fortinbras, Horatio. I mean, and the idea that you're going to have these figures held up on stage, corpses to show the result of these actions. So it's interesting, that point, though, that to choose not to be, whether yourself or another, leads to destruction, absence, privation, evil.
Yeah, and I guess that's the question, that though he recognizes there is this problem, it's not clear that he makes that choice. Because from Hamlet's side, he identifies what he should do with patience, suffering, but doesn't seem to recognize that patience is an action, or to be patient is an action,
Right.
to suffer is an action, implicit in being patient, in suffering, and all of these things, is to renounce. That is to say, he recognizes in that soliloquy that revenge, that this path of revenge would be evil, but he doesn't renounce evil. He continually expresses his choice not to engage in revenge at that particular moment in strategic terms.
Well, and indeed, but at one point, he actually wants to do the greatest imaginable evil. And that is, now I'll do it, now he is a praying. And then he starts to think about it, well, hang on, if he's praying, then he might be close to God, he might be close to salvation. And if I kill him now, he might go to heaven. And what kind of revenge is that? That I might be sending him to God. Yeah. When he sent my father to his death, unhouselled, disappointed, unannealed, he sent him to his death when he wasn't prepared. So now, why should I send Claudius to his death when he is prepared? In other words, he's thinking the best thing I could do is actually not only kill him, but send him to hell. Which is a kind of revenge that's never conceived of by Hamlet's father when he's fighting Fortinbras Senior. Laertes, when he thinks, I'm going to get this guy that's killed my father Polonius, he's not thinking I'm going to send him to hell.
He's really wanting to achieve something eternal. Like not just...
Which is much more evil.
It's a monstrous kind of moral reasoning to say, well, to deny a person the chance to save his soul for these reasons. And again, it's expressed in strategic terms.
Right.
He won't renounce revenge. He'll say it's not strategic to revenge now. And
he wants like forever revenge.
Yes,
like, whoa.
That's a particular moment where Hamlet's moral ascendancy over the person he's revenging himself against is not really something that we can
condone.
Yeah, it's just...
So that's why it's like Tennyson says he's the...
Well, Tennyson says of the play that it's the greatest creation in literature. I think he's talking about the play,
not the person,
not the character.
Because I would have said like maybe
but I mean,
best
in a sense, it's almost a distinction without a difference, isn't it? If he's the greatest character in literature, then presumably this is the... But I mean, then again, part of Hamlet not acting, I think, is that he has moral scruples. So he might be saying, I'm going to do this, I want to send him to hell. But I've often felt in reading it that what's holding him back is this scruple. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this, because maybe it's the wrong thing to do, and maybe, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. It doesn't say, God doesn't send people to, in the Christian dispensation to say, go and round up these people and kill them.
That's right, and I think that it's really often his critics, the people who say, why don't you just get on with it, that seem to have the...
Like, well, with what?
What
do you want him to do?
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, I think that it's, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, Richard Hooker, in a book, The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, criticizes the Puritans in a way that then's taken up by a lot of political thinkers as a sort of astute account of the revolutionary position. That is, say that Hamlet is going to engage in an act of political assassination. It would be both an act of revolution and restoration in a sense. But what he says is the problem with the Puritans is that they will identify all human evil with the existing political order, all good with themselves, and they lead dangerously to the assumption that in changing the political order, they will end evil and bring about good, failing to acknowledge
a utopian vision.
This utopian vision that doesn't acknowledge the reality of original sin and the fact that that this political act is not going to be a spiritual transfiguration. And Hamlet, to his credit, is too morally acute and too sensitive to go in that direction. But he's tempted by that, tempted in that direction when he says things like, "Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right." This really sounds like the utopian vision that I was born to right the evil which is identified with the state, and I will bring about this total spiritual transformation. But the to be or not to be speech suggests that he recognizes the other possibility, that this utopian path is the path of illusion and non-being. It's a sterile path. So
similar to the grave, similar to what he says about human life or humanity when he's in the grave, and what is man with this quintessence of dust? Like he's getting it that actually human life can end up just to used for base uses. Not
but again, it's a
utopian.
biblical allusion too, isn't it? It's dust to dust.
Yes, that's right.
And it's so again, he seems to return at different points to a mode that we're more comfortable with, that perhaps morally, where we...
But interestingly, it's also uncomfortable, because the thing that seems to break into Hamlet's reasoning is death, and the reality of death, and the reality that we all die. And that's an uncomfortable reality, and yet that's when he's not taking on, that he's going to vanquish all evil. That's when he sees, this is my future, of my body.
Yes.
So at the same time, it's like he's more relatable at that moment, and scarily so, because this will happen to us.
Confront our mortality.
Yes, that's right.
And I think those different perspectives on death don't necessarily cohere. So that on the one hand, he'll say the problem with death is that it's an undiscovered country. Nobody ever comes back from the dead, so we don't know anything about the dead. But that's a fine thing to say if you had never been visited by a ghost. I mean, so and then in the gravedigger scene, his vision of death is much more materialist. Alexander dead and turned to clay might stop a hole to keep the wind away. So you have this entertaining of so many different perspectives on death that don't necessarily fit in with one another. And I think this is actually something that Hamlet likes to do. It goes to Hamlet's subjectivity, that part of action or part of a free will involves renunciation. To make a choice is to renounce the other possibilities. Normally, if you say, I love you, you renounce the possibility that you can say, I loved you not. If you say, I was pretending to be mad, you renounce the possibility that you can say you were mad. But Hamlet won't renounce these possibilities. He wants it to be possible that he was pretending to be mad and that he was mad, that the ghost came from the dead, and that the dead are belong to an undiscovered country. And
so he wants to both be and not be.
Right. He wants to, and that's right. And this incapacity to foreclose possibilities by renouncing one of them is, I think, creates that experience of subjectivity that we find so glamorous, but it's also the reason for the personal disintegration of Hamlet.
Yeah. I would love to keep talking about this play, but we have to finish. I think that's a good point on which to finish. Thank you both.
Thank you.